being paired with him, a dummy F-rank student who repeated a school year, and the chairman sarcastically replies that it's logical to have the best pair with the worst student. Both students begin to argue like idiots on which rules to follow as roommates, and when they prolong the issue, the chairman suggests that they settle it the Knight's way by having a duel, and whoever wins will decide the rules for the room, to which both of them agree. An hour later, before the duel begins, Stella tells Icky about the rumor about how poor his grades are and advises him to just give up on being a magic knight, but he tells her he is not going to back out of the fight. The fight begins with Icky summoning his device, and Stella also immediately summons her fiery sword. They charge at each other, with Stella almost landing a strike, but Icky dodges it, and they both follow up with a series of heated exchanges. He commends her swordsmanship, but she tells him that her sword technique is not cheap enough to be seen through. However, he tells her he already saw through it, and immediately charges at her using her sword technique, shocking her. He tells her nobody taught him anything for the longest time, so he had to get good at things all by himself, and then adds that his sword technique is called blade steel. The exchange continues, and he soon manages to land a strike, but shockingly, it doesn't affect her. Then he realizes that the reason she challenged him to a fight was because swords can't hurt her due to her magic. She tells him that she doesn't mind defeating him by leveraging on her magic talent, but even though Icky doesn't have the talent of a magic knight, he doesn't back out and immediately takes his stance as he activates his trump card, Ito Ashura. She begins to attack him with fiery magic, but he dodges all at insane speed, and by focusing all his life force into 1 minute and unleashing all at a time, he maneuvers his way through her attacks and lands a strike, defeating her immediately. However, he immediately collapses from exhaustion, since he can only use this skill once a day, as he is declared the winner. Following that, the chairman visits Stella in the infirmary as she recovers from the fight, and she asks her how Icky is ranked in F considering his skills. The chairman replies that the present ranking system doesn't take fighting skills into account, which happens to be his strength. She adds that despite the odds being against him, he has not failed to continue reaching higher, and she then advises Stella to follow him with everything she's got, as she might learn something from him in the process. Stella later visits Icky in the room and meets him sleeping. She sees a part of his body and immediately begins to fantasize about clapping his magnum, but he suddenly wakes up and asks what the fuck she is doing, embarrassing her. They soon start talking and eventually decide to get along as roommates. The next day, they set out for a morning exercise, and after completing it, Icky happily informs Stella that his sister, whom he hasn't seen in 4 years, will be enrolling the following day. Later during class, an ugly teacher informs everyone about the upcoming intra-school competition and tells them about the schedule, stating that they should prepare to have 1 match every 3 days. Hearing this, Icky thinks about how often he might be getting exhausted due to his noble art skill, Ito Ashura. Meanwhile, as the teacher keeps on talking, she suddenly collapses and she's taken to the hospital. Icky reveals that he was able to enroll in the academy because the teacher approved it despite the unfortunate events that happened the previous year, surprising Stella. She asks him about it as they return from the clinic, and while he explains what happened, a shorty suddenly comes, grabbing him, giving him a feel miniature plot, as she tells him that she's a huge fan. On seeing this, Stella gets jealous and leaves, so he quickly runs after her. However, another girl calls his attention, and on seeing her, he realizes it's his sister, Shizuku. She becomes excited and suddenly kisses him, shocking everyone.
What the fuck?
Stella wonders what the fuck is going on, and Shizuku says it's a sign of deep affection between them, and that they might even do a siscon, since it's been a while since they saw each other. Stella immediately carries the crazy girl away from him, getting her angry for meddling in their business. The two ugly idiots start to insult themselves and soon summon their swords, preparing to fight. Icky tries to stop them, but the matter escalates, and they attack each other, causing a disaster. The two kids are punished, and after serving their punishments that day, they continue to argue as they prepare to go home. Shizuku tells Stella she will not understand what's between blood relatives, prompting her to tell Shizuku to list an example. She suddenly mentions that Stella will not understand how her brother feels after always being treated like he doesn't exist, shocking her as she wonders what she means by that. Shizuku returns to her room and meets Alice, her roommate. Meanwhile, Stella continues to ponder on what Shizuku said to her, and on meeting Icky, she asks him about it. He realizes that Shizuku must have told her, so he decides to tell him his story. His family has produced skilled blazers from generation to generation, but he was born the weakest among them, having no talent, so they began to despise him and treat him like he didn't exist. One day, he couldn't take it anymore, so he left home and headed for the woods, but unfortunately, the winds turned against him during his journey so much that he thought he would die. However, his great-grandfather, a famous hero named Ryuma, suddenly appeared and motivated him, which gave him the dream to aspire to become like him as an adult so he can also help other men out of their mess. This is why he wanted to become a knight, but sadly, no one wanted to teach, so he had to train alone. However, when his family discovered he got into the academy, they coerced the school to make things difficult for him so that he couldn't graduate. Back at their dorm, Ikki takes his bath and Stella decides to join him for a shower plot. The following day, after completing a training session, Stella tells Ikki about her first match in the upcoming intra-school competition. Meanwhile, Ikki has not yet been paired. Soon, Ikki receives a message on his phone, and while they think it's about his opponent, they realize it's a message from Shizuku asking him out on a shopping trip the next day, making Stella jealous. The next day, she follows him to meet Shizuku due to her jealousy and gets pissed at the sight of them being together. On the other side of the mall, some dumb security personnel are suddenly attacked. Meanwhile, Ikki and his friends are unaware of what's going on, and they gladly continue to waste their time. Ikki and Alice head to the restroom, and while they talk, Alice suddenly perceives a strange movement, so he notifies Ikki, and they quickly conceal themselves with magic. Two armed fools suddenly barge in and rain an open fire in the room, intending to isekai anyone there. After they have left, they reappear in the room using magic and discover that the men, along with others, have taken over the whole shopping mall. Alice immediately summons his device, Darkness Hermit, which can manipulate shadows, and they begin to investigate what's happening. They discover that the perpetrators are a bunch of ugly brokies with a blazer among them, demanding a lot of money, and Ikki immediately gets permission to use their device from the chairman. Meanwhile, at the shopping square, the customers are held hostage, including Stella and Shizuku. Shizuku whispers to Stella that she has a plan, but she needs time and tells her not to be an idiot. Suddenly, one of the bandits starts to assault a woman, and her child stands up to defend her. The bandit hits him off and attempts to shoot him, but Stella quickly activates her fire magic and consumes the bullets. The idiot continues shooting at her, but it doesn't affect her. Then the leader of the group, Bishao, suddenly appears and threatens to isekai the mother of the child, but Stella quickly launches an attack to save her. However, she soon discovers that her IQ is low as she realizes that Bishao only lured her into attacking. He absorbs the attack with his left hand and counterattacks with his right, using his device, Judgment Ring. He explains that the affinities of his ring are crime and punishment, where his left hand absorbs all attacks on him as crimes and the right releases that power at his opponent as punishment. He then tells the princess to do some strip dance before them if she wants to save the lives of the people. Ikki, watching from his hiding, gets angry and attempts to intervene, but Alice stops him with his shadow bind magic skill and tells him to trust Shizuku, who can put up a magic barrier without anyone noticing. Shizuku immediately activates her magic skill, forming a water barrier around the hostages, and on seeing this, the bandits decide to isekai everyone. They begin a heavy shooting, and Ikki immediately jumps from above to attack them. They start shooting at him, but he activates Itoa Shura and begins to dodge all the bullets at insane speed. He attacks Bishao and cuts off his left arm using his secret technique before he can absorb his attack. Bishao tries to move, but Alice stops him with his shadow bind, and then an ugly idiot, who's also with the bandits, suddenly stands up from among the hostages, threatening to isekai a woman. However, he is mysteriously attacked with a strange magic skill, shocking everyone as they wonder where it came from. Then Kirihara, Ikki's worst nightmare, appears to take the accolade of saving the people, shocking him. Ikki later thanks him for saving them, but Kirihara starts to insult him in return. He soon reveals that they have been paired together for his first match in the intra-school competition, shocking him. A few days later, the tournament begins with a match between Stella and Momotani. However, Stella scares the shit out of him with her words that make him immediately chicken out like a wimp. After that, Ikki watches YouTube videos on how to defeat Kirihara, but only gets more nervous as he realizes how strong his opponent is. Stella sees him and starts talking about Kirihara's technique, Area Invisible, which makes his opponents unable to see, smell, and sense him due to the ability of his device. Ikki tells her that Kirihara could have backed down if it was her, because her specialized wide area attack could easily overturn Area Invisible, whereas, on the other hand, he is the worst for that ability. Following that, Ikki jogs along the road, thinking of his past awful experiences with Kurihara. He meets Alice, who asks him about his past situation with Kurihara, and later tells him that he has taken on so much that the screams of his soul had gone very silent, which is the reason he continues to smile. He finally tells him that he wishes that someone will one day appear who will listen to the screaming of his soul for him. With just 30 minutes left to his fight, Ikki continues to be nervous over his first official match, and later, as the match begins, Kurihara summons a bow and immediately activates the Area Invisible skill, which turns the whole arena into a forest. He then begins to fire arrows at him, but shockingly, Ikki manages to deflect all the attacks by backtracking the arrows to where they came from to find Kurihara's location. However, Kurihara outsmarts him by suddenly making his arrows invisible, so that Ikki cannot sense them. He soon becomes helpless as Kurihara begins to do a lot of damage to him. Meanwhile, Stella reasons that the best strategy Ikki could have used was to attack before his opponent could begin making any move, and she wonders why he didn't do that. Alice replies that he couldn't because he was too nervous, shocking her as she never realized that Ikki could have been nervous about a fight. Everyone begins to mock him, making Stella angry, and she screams at them, saying that they shouldn't mock the knight she loves. She then rebukes him for giving up so easily. On hearing this, Ikki stands up to his feet, punches himself in the face, and thanks her for the encouragement. He suddenly activates Itoa Shura and begins to analyze Kurihara's past moves using Blade Steel. He soon masters Kurihara's moves such that he is able to stop his next attack, shocking him. Kurihara starts to panic as he continues to fire more powerful attacks, but Ikki deflects all of them. Upon realizing he's got no chance, Ikki suddenly lunges toward him, threatening to isekai him, but he doesn't as he stabs the ground just before him. Ikki is declared the winner, and he suddenly falls from exhaustion. Following that, he wakes up in the clinic and sees Stella beside him. They both confess their love for each other and promise to go up the ranks in the tournament so they can fight each other again in the final. 2 weeks after both of them have started dating, Stella begins to feel sad that she hasn't had a taste of his creamy sausage, but doesn't know how to tell him so she won't come off as a pervert. Meanwhile, after winning 5 battles on a streak, the girls ask Ikki to teach them swordsmanship, and he agrees. However, some ugly, pathetic losers start to envy him. Stella tells him that teaching the girls sword skills may mean that he is helping his future rivals, but he replies that he would be pleased if that happens as it could save them if similar trouble to the shopping mall incident happens to them. The next day, while he teaches his new disciples, some bottom geese who have been hating on him suddenly appear and try to assault him, but he proves to them that they are just a bunch of lowly idiots. They quickly apologize and ask him to also train them how to become a top G. Some other girls also ask him to teach them, and Shizuku soon demands the same, to which he agrees. On hearing this, the jealous princess also makes the same request, but when she realizes that Ikki is reluctant to teach her, she leaves in anger. However, later that night, he explains that she is already above a level he can teach at, as his sword technique can have a bad effect on her technique, which he wouldn't want because he wants her to always be someone who is beyond his imagination. The next day, they'd all head to the pool for a free plot seminar with Ikki. And while he teaches them, Stella speaks with Kagami, who asks her if she has developed plot with Ikki before. But she tells her she hasn't even gotten a proper kiss yet. So Kagami begins to give her some tips she learned from Reddit on how to become irresistible. Meanwhile, Alice is also teaching Shizuki how to run a successful Sisken channel with her brother. Stella fears that Ikki will begin to see her as lewd if she makes the first move, but Kagami urges her to do so and immediately goes to call Ikki. The two meet and soon begin to quarrel over a trivial matter. However, this is followed by a quick plot development. Some moments later, while on their way back to school, they both receive a notification about their next match, stating that they are both facing opponents from the student council. The student council members are known for their great skill, but Ikki and Stella defeat their respective opponents without batting an eye. Meanwhile, a girl has been stalking Ikki since the time at the pool, and while they return from their fights, Alice asks Ikki if he will keep ignoring the girl who has been stalking them for over a week, so he calls her out of hiding. However, the ugly idiot tries to run away but falls into a pool. Later at the clinic, she introduces herself as Ayase, and Ikki immediately realizes that she is related to the legendary swordsman Kaido. He becomes excited and tells her that he practiced swordsmanship when he was a child by watching footage from her father's matches, and then asks her about him. but she tells him that Kato has been hospitalized since after an accident in a match. The two girls ask her why she has been following Ikki, and she reveals that she's been trying to master a sword technique her father taught her, but has not been making progress, so she was thinking of speaking to him about it. But she's too ugly to approach a hot guy. Ikki agrees to teach her, and the next day, they both start their training together. After analyzing her skills, he discovers that the reason Isa is not progressing is because she is trying to copy her father's exact style. He further explains that her body structure is different from her father's, and tells her he can help correct her posture so she can fight better. The plot master bends over and begins to feel her. He then asks her to launch attacks at him again, and this time, she performs way better, exciting her. Later, when they return from the training, he apologizes for touching her all over, but she tells him it made her happy because his hands were strong and big. She asks if they can continue the next day, because she wants to win the selection matches at all costs and participate in the 7 Stars swordsmanship tournament. After the training session the next day, they all head to the restaurant, and while they enjoy their time, Kurado and his gang, recognizing Isa, suddenly appear and start to harass her. Ikki speaks up on her behalf, making Kurado perceive that he might be a swordsman, so he decides to assault him too so as to get him to fight. But Ikki plays dumb and weak to avoid the fight. He soon leaves with his gang after realizing that Ikki is just an idiot, and after that, Stella asks him why he refused to fight, to which he replies that he could be expelled if he used his device here. 2 ugly members of the student council appear and tell them that Kurado was in the top 8 of the 7 Stars swordsmanship tournament the previous year. Later, as they return from the restaurant, Stella asks Isa who the guys were, and she becomes speechless. Suddenly, they receive the notification of their next fight, and Ikki discovers that Isa is his next opponent. Upon realizing this, she runs off in haste and doesn't show up in the training from then on. Ikki meets Alice, who tells him that since Isa's goal is to participate in the 7 Stars swordsmanship tournament, she can't afford to lose any match. However, she has no hope of winning if she faces Ikki, so she might want to make a move before the match. Ikki then shows him a text Isa sent to him, asking them to meet up that night. He meets her at night on the roof of the school building, and she talks about the vow he and Stella made to each other about fighting at the finals in the 7 Stars tournament. She asks what he'd do if he happened to meet an opponent he can't beat before reaching the finals, and he replies that he'd still fight his hardest fair and square. However, Isa doesn't give a shit about righteousness, as she tells him she'd win such an enemy by any means necessary. She suddenly jumps off the building, shocking Ikki. Then he immediately activates Itoa Shura and jumps after her. He manages to save her and asks why she did that, to which he replies that she wanted him to use his trump card so that he wouldn't be able to use it against her in their selection match, which is just 10 hours away as he can only use the skill only once a day. He struggles to return to his room to meet Stella, and the next day, he wakes up in the hospital. The chairman appears and calls him to her office to explain the building he destroyed while trying to save Isa, but he doesn't reveal any information about what happened. However, he asks her about Isa, and she tells him about how her father lost his house and properties to Kurado, popularly known as Sword Eater, 2 years ago after losing in a duel, and since then, he has been in a coma. Ikki realizes that this is why she is desperate to win so she can face Kurado and get back all her father lost. He, however, decides to still fight with all he's got, and then he tells Stella to follow him somewhere as he has something to do before the match. The match begins, and Ikki launches an attack with his sword, but he suddenly gets cut by an unseen whirlwind, shocking everyone as they never knew what Isa's device skill was beforehand. She activates her skill again, and he gets cut again. Then Ikki realizes that she had filled the air with katana cuts beforehand, so that any time she activates her skill, the surrounding air gets sucked in and makes a cutting whirlwind. This skill is called the Scratch of Wind. Meanwhile, Shizuku and Alice realize that Isa had set traps in the arena before the match began, and if the officials discover this, it leads to her disqualification, thus Ikki would win. The fight between the two continues. She suddenly activates the skill again, but he dodges it, shocking her as she wonders if he has realized her trap. She quickly continues to launch attacks at him, and just when she sees an opening and attempts to land a strike, he blocks his with his blade's handle using the irregular guard skill. Isa withdraws her position, and Ikki tells her she is the kind of person he thought she was. It happens that he had gone to meet one of the commentators and told her that Isa would be breaking the rules in the match, but he wants it to be overlooked so that he can prove her true feelings one last time. He gives some motivational quotes before lunging towards her with full force. She begins to send several strikes with her skill, but he perfectly dodges all using perfect vision, and he soon deals a final blow using the secret technique 4, Shinkirō, making her completely paralyzed. He tells her how she has wavered, made mistakes, and lost her pride. However, he encourages her and then offers to help her regain all that she had lost, shocking her, and she wonders why he is still choosing to help her even when she had betrayed him. He extends his hands, and she cries as she sees her father in him. Following that, Isa takes Ikki and Stella to her father's former dojo, where Kuroda now lives, and while they head there, she tells them about the tragedy that occurred 2 years ago, when Kuroda challenged her father to a fight, and he lost before her eyes. On getting to the dojo, Ikki approaches Kuroda's ugly subordinate, asking for their boss, but they try to resist him. He soon appears in Kuroda's living room and challenges him to a duel, shocking him, who reasons that the dumb coward who couldn't fight him earlier has now come to his domain. He tells Ikki to prove that he has what it takes to fight him, and he shows him the passports of the 4 idiots he had beaten outside. Kuroda suddenly activates his device, Orochimaru, and launches an attack immediately, followed by an intense exchange between the two. Ikki sees an opening and immediately attempts to land a hit, but Kuroda swiftly blocks it, shocking him as he marvels at his reflexive speed. The intense sword exchange continues, and as Ikki lunges towards him, Kuroda suddenly attempts an attack from behind, but he dodges it using perfect vision, having already anticipated the attack. As they continue fighting, Kuroda makes a strike with his blade, and while Ikki tries to block it, the blade suddenly changes its trajectory, shocking him. Then he realizes that Kuroda's strength is his reaction speed. For normal people, it is 0.3 seconds, while Stella and Ikki can't beat theirs below 0.1 seconds, no matter how much they train. However, Kuroda's speed is less than 0.05 seconds, which makes him capable of reacting quickly to every attack and gives him an advantage over his opponents. Kuroda is surprised and tells him he is the first to see through his marginal counter skill so quickly. He adds that he was born with it, and Ikki won't be able to match up. Then he immediately launches attacks from 2 directions, but Ikki blocks them. He even goes faster and increases it to quadruple attacks, such that Ikki soon loses balance and gets cut, making him realize that Kuroda has a national tournament-level ability. Suddenly, he sees it as fun and begins to block all his attacks, shocking Isa as he sees him smiling. Then Stella tells her that this must have been the case for her father too, when he saw a strong opponent challenge him as opposed to the times he had spent alone unchallenged. Kuroda soon starts to pant, and Stella realizes that this is his weakness. The more he uses marginal counter, the quicker he exhausts his stamina. A few moments later, Ikki tells Isa that he will now use all his strength to bring back her 2 years. He instantly takes an ominous stance and lunges forward towards Kuroda, without blocking his attacks, until he eventually lands a strike on him, shocking Isa, who realizes that Ikki had just used the last secret technique her father was trying to teach her. Ikki had learned it with blade steel while he was previously training her. Kuroda accepts defeat and tells him they will continue the fight at the 7 Stars Swordsmanship Tournament as he takes his leave. Isa feels ashamed and says she does properly fit as her father's successor. But Ikki tells her that he was able to use the technique to win because she had perfectly learned it, so she is the best fit for it. Following that, while Ikki and Stella sit down to talk, they suddenly receive a message from Isa, informing them that her father has regained his consciousness. After winning 12 consecutive fights, the chairman sends Ikki and Stella to a training camp out of town so they can further prepare for their upcoming matches. And while Stella thinks that she would have time alone with Ikki for plot development, they are welcomed by the student council members. Meanwhile, Shizuku also travels based on her mother's request. After some time, Ikki and Stella set out for the mountains to have a view of the waterfall, but on her way, Stella suddenly begins to feel sick, so Ikki suggests that they return to the camp. However, it starts to rain, and he manages to take her to a mountain lodge. He helps remove her wet clothes so she can be warm, but she tells him she wants to be wet with his cream. However, he is a decent boyfriend as he tells her he cannot do that now because he loves her and wants to be able to proudly tell everyone. Meanwhile, an ugly man has been spying on them from the forest, and he reports the situation to an ugly fatso named Akaza. Shizuku meets her father, who tells her he's proud of her for her wins in her selection matches, but he fails to recognize Ikki's win. In the mountains, a golem suddenly attacks the lodge, but Ikki manages to escape with Stella. He then charges at the golem and destroys it, but the rocks reassemble, and it continues approaching him. Several other golems appear, and while they almost attack Stella, Renren rescues her. The other student council members also appear and start battling against the golems. However, the golems keep reassembling themselves, and they predict that this must be the doing of a steel wire user, a blazer who can remotely control objects by using magic threads. Ikki wonders what they would do to stop the blazer. Suddenly Toka, the student council president, appears and destroys all the golems, once using her lightning magic, Raidkiri, which also sends lightning to the idiot controlling them. Ikki realizes that she was one of the top 4 at the 7 Stars Swordsmanship Tournament the previous year, the top knight of the academy. Meanwhile, Shizuku receives the notification of her next match, and she discovers it is Toka. Following that, Ikki, Stella, and Alice meet to discuss the selection match between Shizuku and Toka, and Stella mentions that it could be dangerous for Shizuku, since her affinity is water and Toka's is lightning. But Alice explains that due to Shizuku's high-level magic, the water she produces is super pure, free from any impurity, so they can't conduct electricity. However, Ikki is worried that his sister might push herself too much, and he rather wants her to be safe. Stella meets Shizuku while she bathes to check if she is nervous, and Shizuku replies that she is since her opponent is a strong one. Stella tells her that Ikki is worried about her, and she is shocked. Later, while she speaks with Alice, she tells him that her brother wouldn't have been worried if it was Stella who was fighting. She then says that she has to become stronger and win the fight so that Ikki can recognize her. The next day of the match, Shizuku and Toka enter the arena, and the battle commences, but both of them refuse to make any move for some time, watching to see what each other's movement would be. Shizuku suddenly unleashes her first move, leading to a heated exchange between them. She starts creating water barriers while Toka continues attacking them. Shizuku suddenly restricts her movement with ice and launches an attack with it, but Toka manages to resist it, surprising her as she wonders if Toka sees something she is not seeing. Both contestants' skills are on par with each other as Shizuku, skilled in long Ranga fights, has been avoiding close Ranga combat, which is her opponent's strength. However, Toka suddenly unleashes a swift stealth move that makes her suddenly appear before her opponent and land a strike, but Shizuku barely dodges it and wonders how she missed her movement. Toka does it again and lands a lightning strike, electrocuting her, but it's Shizuku's water clone. However, she gets injured and starts to bleed. The intense fight continues with Shizuku now playing defense, and the audience wonders what's going on with her as she can't seem to keep up with Toka's attack anymore. Ikki realizes that Shizuku can't see Toka's move. Seikyu appears and explains that the move is called Nukieshi, an old martial arts technique combining breathing and stepping, which helps a fighter to bury herself in her opponent's unconsciousness, making it seem as though Shizuku can't see Toka, even though she actually can. Ikki can't believe Toka can also pull this move, and the chairman tells him that Toka and Seikyu were taught by the same knight, Nangu, shocking him. She adds that Shizuku can't beat Toka, and Ikki says she can only win if she has an ace up her sleeve, which can be used to counter Toka's invisible close Ranga. Upon hearing this, Stella encourages Shizuku, and she immediately gets inspired to fight. Then, she decides to stop defending but attack by any means possible. She launches several attacks with her ice, but Toka breaks through and slashes her with her sword. However, she discovers that it is Shizuku's clone. Several clones begin to come at her, and Shizuku immediately activates a mist barrier that reduces Toka's visibility. She continues to attack with Toka managing to deflect all. She then laces her sword with a water spell and charges at Toka, intending to land a final blow. But as she gets close, Toka shockingly perceives her movement with her eyes closed and immediately activates Raidkiri, defeating her in a lightning slash. Later at the clinic, Shizuku feels terrible for her loss and says she wants to be left alone, but Alice decides to stay anyway to comfort her. Meanwhile, Ikki's father hears that his daughter has lost, so he permits Akaza to do whatever he wants to Ikki. After winning the 14th selection match, Ikki and Stella are excited and remind themselves of the promise they made to each other about competing at the 7 Stars Swordsmanship Finals. After this, they exchanged some saliva, but little did they know that a stalker had taken their pictures. Following this, the chairman calls Ikki to her office and asks him about Akaza, who has been lurking around the school, and he tells her that the ugly fatso is a member of a branch of his family who has always hated him. She tells him she will do her best to protect him, and after that, he and Stella head to spend some time with the student council. They visit some children together, and Iki gets to spend some time alone with Toka as they discuss her fight with Shizuku. She explains that her noble art called reverse sight helps her to read her opponent's state of mind so she can see through Shizuku's traps and surprise attacks beforehand. Later, while he observes her lifestyle, Misoji tells him that helping children is the source of her power and the reason why she is strong, making him wonder what the source of his power is. On getting back to school, their friends quickly came to report the current incident as someone had taken a picture of them kissing and published it in the newspaper. While they are still in surprise, Akaza appears and tells Iki to come along with him for an inquiry in regards to the incident, as ordered by the Morals Committee. From then on, Iki is imprisoned and starts to go through several trials. However, he makes it clear to the Morals Committee that he and Stella love themselves and there is no indecent relationship going on between them. Meanwhile, Stella continues winning her selection matches, while Iki is allowed to have his match at the prison. One day, Stella begins to feel at fault for Iki's situation and says it would have been better if they hadn't been together. On hearing this, Shizuku gets angry and attacks her. She tells her she's only spitting trash as Iki is choosing to go through all of these because his relationship with her is very important to him, making Stella instantly recall what Iki told her at the mountain lodge when she was begging for his meaty sausage. Shizuku leaves in anger, telling Stella she won't forgive her if she betrays him. Following this, Stella decides to cut a part of her hair and send it to Iki to encourage him that she is still holding her part of the promise. In the next hearing, Iki asks to meet his father, the head of the branch, so that he can appeal directly to him about his innocence. On meeting his father, he tells him about how strong he's become and asks if he now acknowledges him. But his father tells him he has always acknowledged him. However, he is considered useless because he has no talent and tells him to give up trying to do anything. This breaks his heart as he realizes that all he has ever wanted until now is for his father to acknowledge that he is not weak, but now his only goal has been shattered. On his next hearing, he is told that his last selection match will be against Toka, and he is challenged to prove his qualification as a knight. If he wins, they will end the questioning, but if he loses, he will have to give up on becoming a magic knight. Following this, Toka invites Shizuku over to speak about her match against Iki. She tells her to advise her brother to withdraw, considering his current poor physical condition, as she would not go easy on him as her opponent. But Shizuku is confused about what to do. On the day of the match, everyone is thrilled to see the outcome of the fight between the two contestants. However, when the match ought to begin, they discover that Iki has not yet arrived for the match, and he is given 15 minutes to arrive before the match is forfeited. The chairman asks Akaza about his promise that the Federation would bring Iki by car, and he replies that when he went to pick him up, Iki had already left on his own. Iki is seen heading to the location alone, and on his way, he is exhausted and thinks about what his grandfather told him when he was much younger, facing the same challenge. He begins to battle in his mind as his inner demon discourages him and tells him how believing his grandfather's useless words has only caused him pain and regrets. He reaches out for the little light in his heart and suddenly falls into Shizuku's arms. Then, he sees his other classmates showing their support and faith in him. Stella also raises her badge to show him she has become a 7 Stars swordsmanship tournament representative, just like they promised each other. On seeing this, he becomes determined and heads into the arena to fight. The match begins and Iki activates Itoa Shura immediately, shocking everyone. He charges at her immediately, summoning all his power, and then he activates the 7th secret technique. Meanwhile, Toka